Okay, YouTube is claiming we're live, but I don't know if we're live. I'm looking at a YouTube window. Aha. We are officially live. Good deal. There is a giant lag, folks. And just to let everybody know, I am using Zoom for this particular recording on YouTube. I have never used Zoom before, so this is being done with a hope and a prayer, but we had some bandwidth issues and things like that. So using Zoom is allowing me to have Mike Wakshull. Did I say that right?
You did.
Excellent. To have Mike Wakshull able to do a presentation with us, and we have an opportunity to learn from him about forensic document examination. So I kind of want to start off with that, because I've had a handwriting analyst on the show, Michelle Dresbold. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with her or handwriting analysis?
Yeah. She does what's called graphology, which is a totally different discipline.
Okay. And I wanted to, see that. And I wanted to actually get a definition of what a forensic document analysis is. And to start off with, what exactly is a document?
Well, technically, a document, what we're looking at right now is a document, technically. A document is anything that really has any content to it. A photograph is a document. A piece of paper with writing on it is a document. Printout on your printer is a document. A PDF file is a document. So it's a very broad term when we say document.
Good. And that's why I wanted to ask, because I was sitting there thinking about it. I'm like, we think document is a piece of paper or a contract, but really you're saying it's just anything of record. So a signed baseball bat could technically be considered a document.
Correct. And graffiti on the wall.
Okay.
I've had cases where I've had to do an analysis on graffiti.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
And what kind of analysis is it to identify the person who did it, or to determine some kind of message?
No. It's to determine can we identify who wrote the graffiti.
Okay. How would you do that?
Well, because when it comes down to handwriting is very unique to the person. And that's why when you go and you sign your name on something, that's your identifier. And the reason is that when handwriting, especially signatures, are habit. You don't really think about how you do it. You learn over time how you're going to construct those letters. And what's interesting, there was a book that was published initially in 1929, a book called a book named Experiments with Handwriting by a British researcher named Robert Zodiac. And one of the studies that he performed was looking at World War I soldiers who lost their primary writing arm and had to learn to write with either their opposite arm, or if they lost both arms or both hands, they had to learn to write by holding the pen in their toes or in their mouth. And something that he discovered is that the stroke structures eventually came back to they weren't identical, but they were very similar. And that reason is it's a very complex neuromuscular interaction where the brain is telling the muscles how to contract to form structures. And there's been follow-on research more recently that substantiates that. So it's very interesting. So it's not something that we think about. We reach what's called graphic maturity. And that's where you start to form the letter structures in a certain manner.
Okay, that's fascinating. Now, at the same time, while it's similar between all these different modes, a person's signature, from what I understand, is never identical. Like, in the sense that if I sign 10 pages, there should be maybe minute, but there'd be differences between every single page. Is that correct? Or would
that's no, that's actually correct. And there was a Greek researcher just published a paper earlier this year, I think it was in January or February, where he looked at it from basically a neurological perspective and physiological reaction of how you see what you're writing. You get the visual feedback, and that's one of the reasons why signatures are never identical, is because the time, what he talked about is the time lapse between when your eyes make the perception and you understand what you've done in terms of the strokes and get that feedback. It's actually too late to make an exact copy.
Interesting.
I'm paraphrasing
okay.
a journal article, a research journal article.
Now, are there those though whose signature is more consistent than others? Like, say, an author who signs 1,000 books at a pop. Over time, are they getting fairly consistent because it's so robotic?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question, but the answer to the question, whether there are people who are more consistent than others, the answer is yes.
Okay.
I had a case several years ago where we had many years. It was someone who died, and the question was what the authenticity of the signature on a will, and it was so close that you would almost think he took a rubber stamp and stamped his name every time.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't
amazing.
It wasn't exact, but it was pretty darn close, and that was over many years.
That's fascinating. And I'm bringing this up. I've actually had a previous guest on. I don't know if you've ever heard of the show Tiger King, but I've had Carol Baskin on, and there has been some controversy about the wills and things that are in probate. Now, I'm not going to assume you've seen any of it, and so everything I'm saying is just speculation, just things that I've heard. But I'm asking because one of the controversies was about his signature being legitimate. And apparently she claims she hired 4 handwriting analysts, and they all said, yes, that is his signature. But the pushback I'm hearing from the people investigating or whatever is, yeah, it's his signature because she traced it 4 times. It's identical in all 4 places, same height, same size, same width. If that is all true, would that be a concern in your mind?
It would, and actually, I was not retained, but Tampa Bay Times asked me to take a look at that.
Okay, so you can good. So maybe you can illuminate us further.
Yeah, and I came out inconclusive because there are certain attributes that just say yeah it is, and some say no it's not, and I said to the reporter, what I really want to see is a better image and it turns out that the document that he was being compared against was, I'm doing this from memory from a couple of years ago. It was being held, I believe, by the courts or something of that nature over in Jacksonville, and the courts in Jacksonville would not release it to anyone.
Okay, and that makes sense. So now, and to be fair to you, you use like a really sensitive scanner, and I think you said that you're pulling at like some crazy high megapixel, and each photo is 175 megabits when you're done.
Each 8.5 by 11 pages, 8.5 by 11 I'm sorry, is 175 megabits or megabytes, not megabits.
Right. Oh yes, sorry.
If you want to get bits, you have to divide. You have to multiply by 8.
Correct.
But it's 175 megabytes, and I scan at 8.5 by at 800 pixels per inch at 24-bit color. And
which is about
what 24-bit color means is that you have 255 levels of red and 255 green, 255 blue. So that's your
right. Yes, 20 is about 24-bit, I think is it 32 million colors? Anyway, yes. It's a crazy amount. And yeah, I understand that, but I'm just trying to get the perspective to everyone. Like your iPhone, which has a glorious screen, at least for a while, was around 300 pixels per inch. So you're doing a resolution that's at 1.2.5 times an iPhone's resolution. So that's very, very blown up.
Well, I actually take that 2.5 and square it, because it's 2.5 times length and width, and so it's really more than 2.5 times.
Okay. But it's very, very big.
Yes.
It's like you could print it out and it would cover the side of a house if you were to print
Yeah, if you wanted to. And,
So
and I do it at that resolution because I want to be able to enlarge without distortion.
And that makes sense. And you can also pick up on a lot more nuances and imperfections. Now, one thing, you are actually optically scanning at that level, correct? And I bring this up because, like the Rittenhouse trial, there was the question where they were trying to use software to blow up a video still, but that's interpolation. You're using something that's actually a lens, correct?
Correct. Unless what I'm getting is, say, a PDF or a JPEG, then I will read that into Photoshop and enhance the resolution, which does an interpolation in order to make it so that I can enlarge it to something that I can without distortion.
That's still problematic, though, right?
Not really. It doesn't improve the quality of the image. It just makes it so that you can enlarge it without distortion.
Okay. Would it ever come up, though, that because there's some sort of AI involved or anything else, that it's interpreting in order to blow it up or to enlarge? I'm just asking in terms of, I know you testify a lot.
Yeah, no one's ever challenged me on that. And in a past life, I started a computer graphics software company. So I know how these documents, I don't know exactly how a PDF is put together, but I understand how it's put together from a technical perspective.
Okay. And on this, and a lot of times I ask questions, I throw things out there, and I'm wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong. So I don't feel bad correcting me. That's the whole reason you're here, so I can learn, and others. Is it getting easier or more difficult for people to manipulate documents now with all the, digital equipment's getting better and better and better and better, and the printers are getting sharper? Is that making your life more difficult?
In some ways, yes. And the reason is that when it comes to altered documents, that what I've seen is where people will lift a signature or lift a piece of a document and put it onto another document using Photoshop or GIMP or Photo Paint or some other digital editing software. And usually they make mistakes. Usually. And when you look at it and you enlarge and you look at the details, you can see those errors, but not always. Okay. And what they'll do is they'll create this document, then they'll print it out and scan it and say, I scanned an original. Well, no, you didn't. And
can you push back and say, give me the original?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes, well, we can't find it.
Okay. Okay. Now, that actually makes me think of something else, because there's some old technology that's been kicking around forever, but from what I understand, it's because it's taking an actual image and sending it over the wire, and that's the age-old fax machine.
Yep.
And they never go away. And again, it's because I understand that if you sign a paper and run it through a fax, it is more likely to be accurate because of the connectivity of point to point going over the digital line versus my scanning it, putting it on a computer where I can manipulate it in another program and then send it over.
Well, but then how do you know that what you're looking at? I mean, I get photocopies of faxes. Perhaps, and these days you don't see all that many fax.
No, you don't.
Faxes,
thankfully,
because people send through email.
Right.
And we have a fax machine, and my wife and I have had. I just had to buy a new. The old one was probably 10, 12 years old and wasn't printing properly anymore. I just had to buy a new one. And she said, well, can you get one, get an all-in-one that doesn't even have a fax?
Yeah,
You know,
well, I
because
mean,
because the
Toad's the
only
best.
faxes
Yeah.
we get are junk faxes.
Oh, that, yeah, and the old jokes. I mean,
Yeah.
spam's been around. Anybody who's ever had a fax machine, like back 20 years ago, realized that the same crude jokes and spam existed way back in the fax days. And it's funny
Yes.
to see a joke coming back around 20 years later with like a goofy cartoon or whatever. Let me see. Okay, to let the chat know, I have a version of the chat going on YouTube. I can't pull any comments up, but I will try to read it as it comes in. I don't know if it's a
Sure.
super chat or not. It's hard to delineate. But question here, somebody's asking Tom Colby, don't checksums still count?
Well, checksums, if you're looking at a digital document, as an example, if you're looking at something that's in created using DocuSign or something like that,
Mhm.
and where checksums come into play, and I actually had this conversation when I was worked for a very large medical device company, and they realized that I was the only person on staff who was a certified information systems auditor. So they asked me to participate in a um, information systems audit, and they said that the way we determined that two documents are the same, are images of the same document, is the byte size is different. And I said, well, that's not exactly correct. And I proceeded to tell them that when I worked for a large bank, we would get documents coming, or we would get records coming in that had a defect in them. And I wrote a little assembler program that would go in and twiddle some bits to make it so that we could read it in properly. And the size was exactly the same. And that's where you do this something called a checksum, which runs a what's called a hash algorithm and when the checksum is identical, then the document in one document is a replica of the other. But that's out if you're looking to authenticate a digital document, then that comes into play. But for what I'm doing, typically, I'm not looking at that.
Okay. And somebody's asking about Frank Barron. What do you think about the robotic arms that can copy signatures? Well, would that lead us back to the same issue that it's an identical signature, and so that would be problematic?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about. The robotic arm was developed by Thomas Jefferson. I don't know if you knew that.
I wouldn't. I'm not surprised. It wasn't Ben Franklin?
No, it was Thomas
He was
Jefferson.
lazy. Okay.
Yeah, and but the question comes down to are we looking at robotic arms, or are we looking at replicating, like when politicians send out letters and they send out 100,000 of them to all their constituents? It's their signature on it, and it's being created with basically what happens is there's a chip that contains their signature, and that'll go on to every one. So, but that's an image of their signature, but no one's trying to claim it's an original.
Yeah, it's like a stamp almost.
Yeah.
Or just a variant of a digital stamp or whatever. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. So to go forward, this has been a cool intro. You brought some stuff that you were going to show, kind of some of what you did. I think there might have been a lottery ticket, some other things.
Sure, we can show that.
Yeah, I just think this is fascinating to actually look at the documents and see what is happening here. And by the way, folks, I can't see the chat now because of screen sharing.
So just think about this situation. Your phone rings. The person on the other end says, "I'm the guy who won $64 million. You must have heard about me." No, I never heard about you. Sorry. But anyway, he claimed that this lottery ticket was left on his dresser. The sun hit it, faded it, and he had a friend who was an architect, was able to read the lottery numbers and showed that he won the $64 million. His friend wrote in underneath each one of the numbers on the ticket. But he said, my friend's an architect, he's not a document examiner, and I need a document examiner who can authenticate that this is legitimate. Mm-hmm. Well, what I did is I went out, bought 3 lottery tickets, made sure that none of them were winners, before doing this experiment.
Okay, one question.
And
What if one was? Would you be like, oh, you know what? I'm done. I just won this. See ya. Have a
yeah,
nice day.
yeah, if one was a winner, I would have gone out and bought a new one that was a loser, because the chance of buying a loser is pretty good.
Okay.
So what I did is I held these 3 lottery tickets over the stove to char them, and at different levels. And what I did is I wrote the numbers for the ticket on top in ink, so I would know what I'm looking for. And then using I scanned them at high resolution, and then using Photoshop, I wanted to see, using different techniques in Photoshop, can I see the numbers? And the answer is yes. They're very faded. I don't know if you can see that on.
Yeah, I can a little bit. Is this
And
your technique, if you don't mind getting into a little, is it similar or maybe not laddish to like green screening? Like if you pick colors that are problematic, hiding those to see if other things are revealed?
no, that's not what I did here. What I did is and normally I would put the technique on there, but I didn't here. But what I did is I used the exposure tool, and I probably used the HLS tool, hue, lightness, saturation on the one below, or the brightness, or something like that. I have it written down somewhere, but I don't remember exactly. But I know on the top one, I changed. One thing I've learned when I worked at Home Savings of America, the group that was right next to me was in charge of finding altered checks. And what they would do is to do that, they would bring them onto the computer and reverse white to black, or invert black and white. And that's how they would find alterations. And I realized that would be a good technique here. But I also had to change the exposure and do some other techniques here to be able to see and I was able to see through the chart.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we wanted to see the actual ticket, and I asked the Lottery Commission if they would send it down to one of their local offices, and they wouldn't, because the Lottery Commission had the ticket. And we went up to Sacramento, which is the capital of California, to the Lottery Commission, and I examined the original ticket, the actual ticket. And this is a scan of the actual ticket.
Wow.
You'll notice there's charring on it, or discoloration. But one of the first things I said was, this ticket got wet. I could tell it. I mean, I couldn't feel it because I was wearing gloves to handle it, but I could see that it had gotten wet. The person didn't tell me that. And it turns out that he not only did it sit in the sun, but he also spilled cologne on it.
Which is like, okay, how long was the stupid thing in the sun? I mean, the lottery is like drawn every couple of weeks. This thing looks like it was left out in the desert, pulled out, and dragged across. Oh my God.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that question, but what I did is I scanned it at high resolution, and using my technique in Photoshop, I was unable to see the numbers. All I could see was, for example, here I could make out that there's a number 30.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, when we go back, 30 was not one of the winning numbers. 39 was, but not 30. So just seeing that number was there said, this is not the winning ticket. And what I did here is I captured part of the technique I used, so I could go back and replicate it if necessary.
Oh,
and I'm just pointing out certain areas, and on here I can maybe make out a 16. 16 was not one of the winning numbers.
Wow.
And the rest of the numbers were invisible because they were washed out with the cologne and everything else.
Do you get better at picking things out? Because it's like a Rorschach test for me, and half of it.
Oh yeah,
so hard to tell.
Because this is taken with the microscope, and that's where you can see that 16 in there, and the 30 in here. Maybe it's just that your screen's smaller or something.
Yeah,
but I was able to see some of it, and what I was able to see was not a winning number. So,
Right. No, that makes sense. All you have to do is show one number that didn't exist and you're done.
right, exactly. So did he win the lottery and throw away the wrong ticket? I don't know the answer to that. But I did know that this is not a winning ticket.
All right. That's awesome.
But he
All right.
hired a couple of attorneys and hired me, went up to Sacramento. So he spent a lot of money on trying to show he had the winning ticket.
Well, that is a weird one because that could not have been cheap. I mean, I'm thinking about your job. If you're dealing with court cases and trials, are you usually in trials or is it usually settled out beforehand?
Most are settled.
Okay.
Yeah, about 10% get into the court.
Now I have a question on that because like, I know you've brought up a case of somebody who had 40% of his property or his share of property went from 40% to 0% or something like that due to a conflict with an ex. And I don't know if you'd call it forgery. In my mind, I'd call it forgery, but I don't know what the technical term is for document manipulation to gain.
Well, technically it was, and this is what you're talking about, is these people got divorced and 15 years later, wife presents this to the Los Angeles County clerk who files this interspousal transfer deed. It transfers his 40% interest in the property to her. And he said, I never signed that, initiates a lawsuit to undo the filing, and it retained me on that case. Now, on this one, you can see that it was actually stamped 1996, and the date on it is February 7, 1996. So this showed up years later. And what I did is my scanner will do 8.5 by 11 size. So I had to do 2 scans to get the top and the bottom on this legal size document. I also scanned the rear.
Okay.
And there's another deed, well, for lots 18 and 19. The one in question is for lot 12.
Now, before we go on, because I want to get back, you said you also scan the rear. Is that so you can pick up pressure prints that are going through the other side, like from a signature?
Well, I'm going to hold off on that answer because sorry. I'm going to show you why.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So there's this other uncontested deed for lots 18 and 19, interspousal transfer deed. And what I did is using Photoshop, I overlaid one on top of the other, just to see how well they comport. And I'm going through this quickly, but there's something called a trash mark. A trash mark is on the glass on a photocopier. It's called a platinum. If there's a little speck of dust or something, it'll take that picture. So, but the only way you get a trash mark in the exact same spot on 2 pages, especially pages that are created far apart, is if one's a photocopy of the other. Now, what I did is I offset this a little bit so you could see both, because if I put them one on top of the other, you wouldn't see the red and black. The red would cover the black. And I offset this lot 12 / and you can see that this is part of a normal deed. But
now you do a color replace to do that. You just say, okay, find all the black on this document, turn it to red, and then that allows you to do the overlays.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, and there were 2, and then I put one on top of the other using Photoshop. But you can see that how well these align. So let's look a little more detail. I overlaid the 12/7/96 of both deeds, and you can't even tell hardly that there's a black under there.
No, you can't.
They're perfect. And the only way they're perfect in alignment is and we could say in alignment relative to the signature line and relative to the printing on here, is if one's a replica of the other. And this misalignment, that's just photocopy because photocopy is never an exact copy.
Right.
And then what I did is on here, this is the the reason for doing high resolution scans. You can see under the colon, there's a ghost of an S.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You can see the 2, there's missing ink on the 2. And you can see the ghost of the AND and the ghost of the 19 under here.
Wow.
So what they did is they made a photocopy of the lots 18 and 19 uncontested deed, took a sharp instrument and scraped off the toner, then took a typewriter and typed in the rest. And the reason why you're missing toner on some of these, for example, on the 2 and up here on this slash, is because the paper was disturbed. And because the paper was disturbed, some of the ink didn't attach to the page.
Okay. That makes sense.
And then looking here on another part of it, we can see that they typed a 7 over a 7. And you can see the old had a little dimple.
Like a little serif.
Yeah. And it came down a little further. You can see the little lump there. You can see the ghost of the old number 6. You can see that the 8 is missing some. And you can see the 9 looks fine because they added that there was no 9. So they felt they didn't need to scrape off the 7 because they were just typing over an existing 7, and the 9 was already there, wasn't there, so they just added that in.
Would they have been better off? And I'm just curious if they just scraped the whole number off completely and then put a whole fresh number in there.
I don't know. I don't do those things. And by the way, I didn't.
Okay, this isn't a how-to class, I guess. Here's how to defraud.
And I realized that this particular presentation that I have up here doesn't have the rear. So if I had the image from the rear, you would actually be able to see where when they scraped it off, it actually pushed into the paper, and you can see that it's sticking out from the back.
Okay.
For the old numbers.
Okay.
Okay.
Very cool.
So scanning it, looking at it from the back is really valuable.
Oh, it makes total sense. So what about my comment though about looking for the ghost or the pressure points of a signature on the back?
Well, you'll do that on a where there's a signature. You can look, and there's not always if a document is signed on a hard desk or something, you won't always get anything pushing back from the back. If it's signed on a pad or there's a page below it, then the pressure will make indentations down to the page below.
It makes total sense. Now, what my question is that what was the outcome of your findings?
Oh, the outcome of that one was the judge gave the 40% interest back to the husband. And the wife actually didn't have an attorney. She acted as her own attorney. And when it came time to cross-examine me, she started yelling at the judge, who then told her, "You're supposed to ask questions of the witness."
Okay, well, I guess my next question is, why were there charges filed? Because I would think that that's fraud and that's criminal.
Yeah, I don't think there were. I think the husband just wanted to move on with his life. Be done with it.
Because somebody who went through all that trouble, I'm sorry, is showing a propensity that I would not necessarily trust them with any property.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's a devious mind to sit there scraping and doing this and doing that. And, oh my God.
Yep.
Oh. So I see on the left you're pulling up some different previews. Do you have another sample?
Well, sure. If you want, we can go take a look at, this was a question about a trust, and it was a 15-page trust. There were two versions of it. One made it a revocable trust. The other made it an irrevocable trust. So they were identical pages 1 through 15, except for page 3. Page 3 had that different language in it. And the attorney wanted to know, did they use whiteout and then type in something? And the answer was no. So what was different about page 3? Well, again, scanning at very high resolution, you can see things that you otherwise can't see. And notice on here that the toner is missing sections in all these letters. So it's a defect in the printer. That was only true on page 3. Page 7, which I put on here as an example, you don't see any of that. And that's what you saw in the other 14 pages.
I get it. So it'd be more uniform, but toner loss on the letters would be pretty similar or consistent.
Right. Or you would see it in some, maybe in every 4th page, or, you know, depending on the print, or however many, as the drum roll goes around, you would see it if it's a defect in the drum or something. But you only saw it on that one page, which told me that page 3 was printed on a different printer, or on the same printer after it became defective.
Wow. Now, have there been any that, you know, because I think of something like that, and I don't know if it's being sloppy or just the inability to get to the original equipment. Have you run into any situations that have stymied you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, as an example, I had a case out of Detroit several years ago where the question was, did someone sign an auto contract? And if you ever bought a car, you know that on the retail installment agreement that you sign your name about 20 times on the front page. And so, and he said that those signatures were all his. Problem was, he had 3 different versions of his signature on that one page. So the question was, just because the signature we were looking at on a different page was a bit different, and tell the attorney, I don't know, maybe it's a situation where he had 4th signature that we don't know. We don't know. So my answer is it's inconclusive. I have another case that it's in progress now, but in this one, the person's first name is written very simply, so it wouldn't be that hard to simulate it. Last name, I only had I think 3 or 4 examples of his last name, and they were all written differently. So my answer on that one was, it's inconclusive. I don't have enough examples of his writing his last name, and I only have one that's really contemporaneous with the one on the will, and that looks different from the others. So therefore, I don't know the answer.
Even you run into problems with like stroke victims and things like that too. Like, you know, if somebody changes their will at the last minute after a condition, or.
Sure. I had a situation, I don't know if that's in this one. I have a lot of different presentations.
Oh, sure.
And I'm just looking through this to see if that is in here.
And while you're looking, I have a question.
No, it's not. But the answer to your question is yes. I had a situation several years ago where, well, I'll talk about 2. One where the signature on the change of beneficiary form looked very much like the decedent's signature.
Okay.
But problem is, the signature on the change of beneficiary form was signed a few weeks after he had a stroke. And we had other signatures of his post-stroke, and you could see the decline day by day by day. And because of that, my opinion was he didn't write the question signature because he didn't have the skill to write it. There was another one that comes to mind. It was out in Palm Desert or Palm Springs or somewhere out in that way many years ago, where there was a question about whether a woman signed a will. And the other side was saying, well, the reason why the signature is different is she had brain surgery just before she signed it. So the brain surgery is what affected her handwriting. So I contacted a a neuropsychologist or psychiatrist down at University of California, San Diego, and asked him, is there any research on this type of brain surgery on handwriting? And turned out there was. And that type of brain surgery did not affect the parts of the brain that are used for writing. So therefore, my opinion was the reason why the signature is different is someone else wrote it. It's not because of it. And I included the journal article with my report.
Oh, awesome. Now, was that in court that you had that? Or
no, it's settled.
Okay.
The settlements are confidential, so I don't know.
Oh, no, I don't care about that detail.
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat asked, is the electronic signature system safer than physical handwritten signatures?
Depends what you mean by electronic. Or if you're talking about DocuSign, or are you talking about signing on digital tablets? And signing on digital tablets is very different because the digital tablets do what's called polling, or sampling rather. It does sampling, and as you move the stylus across the pad, it samples where it is on a grid, and depending upon the manufacturer and the type, it's anywhere from 400 to 100 times per second. And then depending upon, and it does a plot, point to point to point, unless it uses what's called curve smoothing algorithms, so that it doesn't actually go through the points. It tries to figure out what a smooth version of that would look like. So it's not really a replica of your signature. I don't like to use them as what we call exemplars or examples of someone's handwriting for comparing with ink signatures. And then there are other people like me who just scribble on it, and you're done.
Well, yeah. There you go. Sign the UPS thing. Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could totally relate to that. So, but then I guess I could ask then again, like a DocuSign or some form of two-factor authentication.
Yeah, DocuSign is a totally different ballgame. That's using encryption techniques. It's not a real signature. And my problem with DocuSign is, how do you know who clicked the mouse? You can get the IP address and trace it back to a computer, but how do you know who was sitting at the computer? I mean, I just went through buying Tesla batteries, and the whole thing was the change orders and the contracts and so on. That was all done with DocuSign. But there's no proof that I'm the one who clicked the mouse.
Well, I thought that's what a two-factor type of scenario would give. Something you know, something you have.
Yeah, but it wasn't. And let's look at something else that's interesting. This was a case out of Palm Springs. And what did it say under the scribble? That was part of my task.
Okay, good. I was just saying, I don't know.
So using different techniques, this was using technique in Photoshop. You can see under the scribble, here's the person's name, and it said AKA. But the question is, what did it say in the print, right? Well, using other techniques, using different lighting, and then bringing it into Photoshop and doing an exposure adjustment, you can see that it said tenant under it.
That's amazing.
And then other parts of this document, it was a real estate contract, were all scribbled out, and we needed to see what was written under the scribble. Wow. So using different lighting techniques and different filters, I was able to see what that said. Rec starts October 5th, 2016. And then under here, it said return blueprints. But that was all, you couldn't read that. It was all scribbled out. And then over here, it said site plans.
Why was it all scribbled out?
I don't know. I don't get into
details. Okay, I just didn't know.
Yeah, that's for the attorneys. I try to stay as far away from the details as possible. And then there's other techniques that we use. This is what's called an electrostatic detection apparatus. That's what ESDA is. And when you're writing on a piece of paper on a pad, you're putting indentations in the page below. So if you give me that page below and I put that on the ESDA, I can tell you what was written on the page above. Now, this was a probate case wanted to find out, did the decedent actually write the entry on here?
Yeah,
Well, when I put the page on the ESDA, on the electrostatic detection apparatus, you could see that someone actually had practiced writing the entry at least twice on the page above. And then when he was satisfied with it, or she, went and wrote it on the document. So that was something that was brought up, is why would someone have to practice writing it on the page above before doing this?
Do you go into cases, and I am genuinely curious about this, like there are some spouses that mimic their spouse's signature all the time, they sign for each other and get to be really, really good at it. How do you determine whether it's the original person or not if they've been doing it for a long time?
You need to know which ones were actually done by the original person, by the person whose name is there, and then look for the anomalies, the details in the actual writing.
Okay.
Because no one ever replicates someone perfectly.
Okay, well, and I wanted to ask because even I can't replicate myself perfectly. So that's why it's like it could get confusing if we never sign exactly the same way.
Exactly. And here's another example. We're using infrared. And on this, if I have another presentation, but I'm not going to pull it up right now, where you would see that on the will, it says "after I die" right here. You don't see the words "after I die."
No.
You see multiple underlines. These were underlines of part of the writing on the will. And when you look at that in white light and just look at it on the page, they look identical. But you can see there are different lines here, and that means that different pens were used to write that.
Wow. So do you have a routine?
And "after I die" was written with a different pen. And I was able to show that at least four different pens were used to write this holographic will. And based on that, the other side withdrew from the case after they got my report.
Okay. On that note, how do you go about when somebody brings something to you? Because do you automatically say, I'm going to scan it this way, take pictures of it? And, do you do all these things naturally, or do you go by instinct? I mean, what makes you determined to go use the camera, take an infrared shot on this and maybe not something else?
Well, I'll do that. But if it's a photocopy, that's useless.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. It won't give you anything. You have to have an original. But normally what I'll do is I'll take an original document. I'll put it on on what's called a video spectral comparator, which is a high-end infrared and ultraviolet camera, and do a look at the ink composition, and then I'll put it on the electrostatic detection apparatus just to see if there was anything written above it. And those are just standard techniques. Most document examiners don't have that equipment. And most document examiners are really handwriting analysts. They'll do a comparison of handwriting, but they don't really have the tools or the knowledge to do a document. Now, something that's interesting, there's software, it's called NEGA. It stands for Digital Negatoscope. It's from a company in Spain. And one of the more difficult problems that we have as document examiners is to know which line came first. As an example, on this, which line is the blue over the black or the black over the blue?
I'm guessing the black's over the blue. But
and you're wrong. And I know that because I made this experiment.
Oh, of course you did. All right.
And the reason is to show that black always shows over blue.
Huh.
And That's why using the NEGA software, again, it stands for digital negatoscope. A negatoscope is an instrument used by radiologists to examine x-rays. But what they discovered is with their software, it'll show you which line is on top of which. So you can clearly see when you is the text on top of the or is the printed on top of the handwriting, or is the handwriting on top of the text, are the print. And on here, you can see clearly that the handwriting is on top of the printed line.
Wow. Yeah, for sure.
So that's where I'll use that software. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool. And
it's amazing. Actually, I just saw the last slide because we're going to be wrapping up here in a minute. I was hoping you could talk about your book.
Sure.
I saw that coming up.
Sure. One is called Forensic Document Examination for Legal Professionals, and it's to educate attorneys who are the people who really retain people like me to partner with them on a case as to what is it that we really do? What techniques do we do? What are some of the tools that we use? Where do you need a specialist? For example, if you want to do an ink analysis, you need to hire an ink chemist.
Right. Makes sense.
I mean, or when you want to know about paper, that's where you hire a paper expert, a paper chemist. Like my friend Doug Cobb his business is called Paper Forensics. That's what he does. He worked as a chemist for one of the big paper companies for, I don't know, 30 years or so. And so there are areas where you really need a specialist. And that's where it comes into play. And the purpose of the book, where you see the little numbers on here on the backside, it gives it tells what is that.
Oh, cool.
So that's kind of a legend. But it's showing different cases that I've worked on. Are this one down here in the lower left corner, that was an interesting one. It was a mesothelioma case, and I was shown diagrams from some kind of factory, I forget what. But what was interesting was you could see that they took out the word asbestos in certain places. Yeah. And on here, this is just showing how this number 8 was written over a 6.
Yep.
And this is from a case that I worked on, where that's actually from this book, The End of the Zodiac Mystery. And in 2012, I was retained to compare the handwriting supposedly of Susan Mustafa's client, Gary Stewart, who thinks his father was the Zodiac killer, who was a serial killer in Northern California, late 1960s, early 70s. And my book is about how it's not about the Zodiac, it's about how I did the work on that book, which became a New York Times bestseller. So, so it's really more of a technical book, but it talks about how did I do the work, and it has all the comparative analysis. And that one was interesting because after I published that, and after Susan's book was published, we learned that one of the key examples of his father's writing was not written by his father. It was a marriage certificate, and it was written by the preacher. And the writing matches the Zodiac writing very well.
God, nothing creepy about that.
But the mugshot of Gary's father matches the police sketch of the Zodiac killer that was created from eyewitness reports. Now, what's interesting is when the preacher's tenure was up at the Methodist Church, they change churches every 4 years. He quit the church in 1964, moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, changed his name, and basically disappeared. So you know, I have questions. Did he and Gary's father work together as being Zodiac? I don't know, but they're uncannily similar.
Wow.
The writing and the mugshot comparison with the police sketch. So just interesting.
Yeah, that is.
Little side note.
So, well, I guess there's definitely a mystery still out there. So now folks can get a hold of you if they need your services, or I imagine you might offer training or lectures or things like that at quality9.com.
Right. Yeah. And I do a lot of presentations. Yeah. This is my second one today.
Well, you have a lot to share, and I very, very much appreciate it.
So yeah, I mean, if people have questions for me, they're welcome to send over an email. My email address is on the website, and
Awesome.
I appreciate the opportunity to share some of this.
Yes, and folks, what do you think about all this? Please answer in the comments below, and you never know, maybe Michael will look at the comments and see them there too.
Oh, I can't see the comments, but if you do,
when it'll be on YouTube, so you'll see them. They'll be there.
Okay, I was going to say, if you see any, just don't hesitate to ask
Absolutely.
them.
All right. Well, sir, thank you so much. This is a fascinating thing.
Great. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, Eric.